Good afternoon and welcome back. Among the significant firsts associated with STS-7, this is the first reflight of a shuttle veteran. The mission commander is Navy Captain Robert Crippen. It's my privilege to turn this over to him and let him and the crew make some statements, and we'll invite your questions here in Houston and at the other centers. Cripp?
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to see such a large gathering. I thought the flying of the shuttle had become rather mundane, and we couldn't bring out this size of group. I think we know why most of the people are here, though. It's been a year since we set up here and were announced as a crew, and since that time we've had an additional crew member added. After Flight 5, NASA decided that they wanted to try to understand the so-called space adaptation syndrome a little bit better, and we elected to fly a couple of positions on two flights, Flight 7 and 8. And Dr. Norm Thagard, who at that time was our support crew and was intimately involved in all of the preparations for our mission, was certainly the guy that I thought ought to be added to the crew, and he was so selected. So Norm Thagard, who's sitting on my far left right now, will be acting as the third mission specialist, and he primarily is going to be doing experiments that we hope are going to make us a little bit smarter about why some people end up not feeling so good in space. I'll go through the rest of the crew right now, who most of you probably know. On Norm's right is Colonel John Fabian. John is sort of the lead mission specialist for all of our on-orbit activities, and is the one that I hope keeps us out of trouble when we're doing most of the operations that we have to do on orbit. To his right is Dr. Sally Ride. Sally, during ascent and entry, will be acting in a capacity I like to refer to as sort of a flight engineer. She keeps us directed on the procedures, hopefully all nominal, but is prepared to help us wade through any contingency procedures that we might encounter, and is so acted in most of the simulations that we've been doing, including this morning where we were just going through some ascent emergencies. To her right is Captain Rick Hauck, and Rick is my pilot, sits in the right seat, and is primarily responsible for managing all of the systems on board and being prepared to back me up if we have any control problems that require him to fly the vehicle. And when you've got all that kind of talent on board, all I have to do is sit back and manage, so I don't have much work to do. The flight of Flight 7 is scheduled right now to lift off early in the morning on June the 18th. I believe 7:33 Eastern Daylight Time is the current flight schedule. It's the way everything's going right now. We anticipate making that. We're going to fly 6 days, and we've got lots of interesting things to do. And hopefully, if weather and no problems encountered, we will be coming back to Kennedy Space Center again very early in the morning, just before 7 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, landing on the shuttle landing facility out there. What I would like to do now is let each of my crew give you a brief idea of the kinds of things that are going to be happening up there. Why don't we start out with Norm. Norm, why don't you give us a brief synopsis of the kinds of experiments you're going to be looking at?
Okay. Primarily, we want to look at two areas that are related to the two leading theories about why people have space adaptation syndrome. The first one involves the vestibular system and conflicts between the vestibular system and the visual system. So to that end, we'll be doing several tests. The main test, of course, is the eye tracking test, the electrooculograms, or EOGs we call them for short. And the second principal area that's been cited as a possible cause, at least contributing for space adaptation syndrome, is increased intracranial pressure. And we have several tests we can use to look at that, from the simple one of just looking into the eyes with an ophthalmoscope, like the doc always does when he gives you a physical exam. And then we can see if there are any changes in hearing acuity. And we have just a simple audiogram that we do that, and we have a little more sophisticated audiogram that consists of putting clicks in the ear and then looking at the electrical impulses that go through the nerves to the brain, and that's called evoked potentials. So those are the two primary areas that we intend to look at. It's in the nature of basic research. We're trying to get a handle on exactly what the interrelationship is between these nerve systems, these sensory systems, and then to look at the pressure.
Okay. Sally, why don't you give us a rundown of some of the experiments that you're dealing with?
Okay, well, we're starting off the on-orbit operations really on flight day one. We deploy our first communication satellite on the 7th orbit, which occurs roughly 9 or 10 hours into the flight. That'll be the Anik spacecraft, and I'm sure that you're all familiar with these type of spacecraft. We launch them from PAMS, and we've got 2 of them on board. The Anik is made by the Hughes Corporation, and it's a Telsat company. It's for the Canadian government. We go on to the second day and launch our second communication satellite, the Palapa, which is also a Hughes spacecraft, and that's launched for the Indonesian government. Then after we've gotten the communication satellites up into orbit, we go into some of the experiments that we're carrying, both in cabin and out in the payload bay. We've got a pallet out in the bay that's called the OSTA-2 pallet, which by now you've probably heard more about than we have in the last couple of days of briefings. That's primarily material science experiments, and the pallet is put together by the Marshall Space Flight Center. We've got 3 MIA experiments, they're called. They're all materials processing, an acoustic levitator, and then a couple of experiments where we heat up the contents and test how the thermal response can be changed in zero gravity. And then we've got 3 mouse cams on the OSTA pallet, one of which is a reflight of a Flight 5 mouse experiment. And again, you've probably heard as much about those as I could tell you. We've also are carrying the Cephas. That'll be again carried in the mid-deck of the crew compartment. This will be a reflight, of course, of the Cephas. And the samples that we'll be carrying, we believe, are very similar to the ones that are carried on Flight 6. And really, the only changes that we're making are probably in the carrier buffer itself. So that ought to be a very familiar experiment to you. We're also carrying the MLR again. That'll be the 4th flight of the MLR. And we're carrying the SPAs. I'll let John tell you about that.
The SPAs will take a good deal of our time and attention during the flight. We will begin activities with the SPAs shortly after the deployment of the second telecommunication satellite on day 2, where we'll perform a rather extensive health check to make sure that the SPAs is ready for the next 3 days of activities. We will then spend basically 2 days allowing the SPAs to perform its own set of experiments while it's still attached to the cargo bay. The SPA satellite carries 8 different experiments, 7 of which will be conducted totally or partially in the cargo bay, 1 of which is done only while it's free and detached from the orbiter, and 1 of which is done in both of those modes. So the 2 days of attached operations with SPAs allows us to get a good database on a wide range of experiments, from checking the environment around the space shuttle using a dual-channel mass spectrometer, to material science experiments, to an investigation of heat pipes and their future uses in the space program, different types of solar cell materials which will be evaluated on the flight. And after that 2 days of activities, then we'll prepare to do what will probably be the most interesting thing about the flight in terms of the payloads, simply because it will be the first time that we have released from the space shuttle a satellite which we will then subsequently retrieve. The SPAs will be maneuvered with the remote manipulator arm to a position above the cargo bay and released. And one of the interesting things about the SPA's vehicle itself is that it is a very good camera platform. It has its own computer system and battery power and mounted on the top will be 2 television cameras, a 16-millimeter movie camera, and a 70-millimeter still camera. And we hope to get some very interesting photographs, both motion picture and stills, of the orbiter and the Earth below during the SPAS mission. We will twice recapture the SPAS. After the first capture, we will stop and have lunch, and then after lunch release it again and fly around the SPAS and pick it up the second time, which completes then that day's of activity. On the last day of the mission, last full day of the mission, we'll again use the SPAS, and its purpose at that time will be to help evaluate the remote manipulator system and perform a series of tests which have been defined for the flight, which are similar to some tests which were performed with the RMS on previous flights. Rick is going to tell us about how the orbiter maneuvers around the SPAS in the area that we call proximity operations.
Very briefly, we are very interested in how the orbiter interacts with a free-flying satellite. We're interested in the terminal phases of rendezvous with free-flying satellites. If you look ahead to Flight 13, which Bob will be commanding also, the intent is to rendezvous with the Solar Max satellite, which had a failure on it, which we hope that we can repair by grappling it and exchanging some of the hardware on it. But we have to do that and build up to that in a logical step at a time, and Flight 7 with SPAS gives us an opportunity to release a free-flying satellite, and SPAS is unique in that it has its own attitude control system and therefore and has a telemetry system which will give us some good feedback of data as to how we affect the dynamics of a free-flying satellite as we fire our reaction control jets to maneuver the orbiter itself. So briefly, as John said, it will be in 2 phases. The first phase in the morning, Crippen and John will be in the back of the flight deck, John operating the arm and Crippen flying the orbiter. We'll release it, back away from it, maneuver the orbiter so that it takes up station keeping, a stable point about 1,000 feet along the velocity vector of the 2 vehicles in front of the SPAS. Stay out there for several hours conducting several tests and then firing our reaction control jets very slowly, rejoining on SPAS and grappling it. And as John said, we'll take time out for lunch. And then in the second part of the day's activities, myself and Sally will proceed to the back of the flight deck where we will do a similar operations from what was done in the morning, but specifically firing some jets at the SPAS, seeing how it influences SPAS, looking at its attitudes and rates through telemetry, and then maneuvering SPAS to a position that will be compatible with maneuvering the orbiter in an out-of-plane maneuver along a 200-foot sphere, such that as opposed to maneuvering in and out in the orbital plane of the 2 vehicles, will be coming in offset somewhat. We'll go in and grapple it and put it back in the bay and call it a day.
Okay. Well, with that information to start with, why don't we go ahead and throw it open to questions, John?
Questions?
And do we need these prior to switching to other centers?
It might be helpful, yeah. You can hear with a little higher fidelity using those things. Anybody have anything? Gee, this is delightful. Jules Bergman?
Cripp, that almost sounds like too jammed a flight plan for a 6-day flight. Do you 5 feel you'll have enough time to get rest?
It is a packed flight, Jules. I was somewhat concerned about that when we first took it over. I'm satisfied now from the simulations that we've gone to that the activities that we have laid out are done in a manner such that if we run into problems, we have selected things that we can eliminate. We do have plenty of time to get rest. The only problems that we have to worry about if we run into some kinds of contingencies with the vehicle or with some of the experiments themselves that might take up some more time, and we will have to be selective how we do that.
Let me follow up on that by asking, what happens if you can't deploy either the Anik or the Palapa on their given times, at their given times?
Sure. We have a backup.
You then have to drop other items.
We have a backup deploy opportunity on flight date 3, which is the day that we've normally set aside for the attached experiment operations on the spas. And what we've done is build our flight plan in a manner to allow us to deploy whichever satellite it is, either the Anik or the Palapa, in the morning. And we have more or less packed our afternoon fairly tightly that goes ahead and tries to put in both the morning activities and the afternoon activities simultaneously.
Lynn Shearer, right in front of you there, Joyce.
Lynn Shearer, ABC News. Cripp, as the first shuttle astronaut to be flying for the second time, could you talk some about your feelings about the orbiter, about this orbiter compared to the other one, the differences in training, and what sorts of things are going through your mind as you train for this mission as opposed to the very first one?
Okay. Well, I think the Columbia on the first flight that John and I flew proved to be an excellent vehicle. We really had very few problems as far as I was concerned from our first flight. The vehicle subsequently had some more problems on subsequent missions, but it still turned out to be a very good vehicle. I think the Challenger on the first flight that Paul Weitz and his crew took it on last year turned out to even be cleaner. It really looks good as far as the vehicle is concerned. So from that aspect, we think we've got a good machine, and we're looking forward to going flying it. From the other aspect of being the commander as opposed to being the PLT, I think the big thing there is I got all these folks working for me, and I can have fun and take pictures, and they're going to do all the work.
If I could just follow up, what about the differences in training? What kinds of shortcuts could you take this time, for instance? What did you learn that wasn't necessary? What did you want to add that you might not have done before?
Okay. The things that I needed to learn were less vehicle-oriented and more mission-oriented. I had to understand what the total deployment scenario was like, although that was primarily the responsibility of John and Sally, but also the proximity operations. But the main thing that I think that was my responsibility now was to see if I could make the crew knit together to work as a team, and I've been very proud of that effort because I didn't have to do anything. They did it all themselves, and I feel very good about where we stand now with respect to training. We're sitting here with like a month to go, a little less than a month, and as far as I'm concerned, we're ready to go right now. We've got a few additional squares that we're going to check off that are primarily just polish, but we're ready to go.
John Getter from Channel 11. Pete, I want to get Roy Neal next, please. Yeah, Pete, would you go get Roy Neal back there?
Two questions. First, for Dr. Thagard, your tests seem to be essentially physiologically based. Are you thoroughly convinced that space adaptation syndrome is physiologically based and not at all related to psychological stresses and so on?
I don't know to what degree psychological stresses like that cause people to have...
Can you hear that okay in the auditorium?
Yes, your mic doesn't seem to be coming through there.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're talking to...
If I talk down to that. I probably ought to ask Cripp first. He said that I couldn't... I ought to use words in one syllable.
Everybody that understands.
How am I doing so far?
You're doing excellent.
Good. Okay.
Not excellent, good. Doing good.
I really think it's probably physiologic, and I think that we're going to be able to look at some of the tests we do and see objective evidence that there are physiologic events going on. Maybe psychology contributes, but I think the principal thing must be physiologic.
Second question for Dr. Ride. Somebody has to ask it. Now that you've had a year to think about it, the same question I asked you when you were announced here a year ago. How do you feel about, you came here to be an astronaut, and you find yourself now a footnote and a symbol, drawing more reporters than the last two missions combined here for the final pre-flight. Your reactions, how do you think, or what do you think about all this?
Well, I guess that my answer is probably going to be the same as it was a year ago. I'm so excited to get a chance to fly that I'm able to ignore all you people.
Roy Neal.
Oh, I hope you won't ignore us entirely, Sally, because I have a question for you and for John and for Rick. I'd like you to sort out, if you will, the SPA's proxops. I'm trying to figure out who does what, where, and when in that sequence of events. And I wonder if the three of you can kind of put us straight on that score.
Well, let me start if I can. Rick was trying to tell you where folks are in the vehicle during the proximity operations, and we basically have organized ourselves into two teams. The team which operates in the morning just simply changes positions to operate in the afternoon. The morning activities will have me at the RMS. We'll have Crippen flying the orbiter at the aft station. Rick will be monitoring all of the orbiter systems and making sure that they're ready to support the proximity operations, and Sally will be doing all of the SPA's interfaces. And in doing that, Rick will be in his normal crew position, and Sally will be in the commander's position. During all of these operations, Norm will be supporting us with all of the photo requirements that have to go on during the SPA's activities. In the afternoon, we simply again swap positions, with me taking Sally's place and Rick and Crippen swapping positions, and Norm continues to support us for all of the photo activities. I don't know if that clears it up or not.
It does pretty well. Norm, does that mean you'll try to give us some video during that sequence? We understand there's a pretty good chance that during some stateside passes, we might be able to see you aboard the orbiter from the SPA's.
We have so many cameras that I probably need a checklist. We're going to get video, and we're going to get motion pictures, and we're going to get still pictures. We'll get some of everything.
I'm talking about live transmissions, Crippen. Are you going to try to feed
Roy,
some of that to us?
We've got a small problem associated with that with the FM antenna that we have, which is located on top of the orbiter, is in the same proximity as the antenna that we use to do RF communications with the SPA satellite. And there is a possibility that if we try to radiate to downlink TV, that we might cause an interference in that link. We are considering trying to attempt that in certain phases of flight. However, we're prepared to drop it if it does cause us any problems. Consequently, to the best of my knowledge, we have not scheduled any TV to be live during that particular period. We're all going to document it via videotape recording. But if it is all possible, we might try to pull out some live, but we don't want to promise it because we're not sure of how those antennas are going to behave.
Your name and affiliation is?
Hello. Yasuko Tanaka, TBS Tokyo Broadcasting System. I have two questions for Dr. Ride. Now, having a background as an astrophysicist, you must have looked at the stars, planets from Earth. Now you have a chance to look at back the Earth. What is your expectation, or what are you looking forward through this anticipated experience besides the very busy, complicated mission you have to carry? And the second question is, are you intending or planning or thinking about continuing your studies in X-ray astrophysics?
I guess that when I came to NASA, I managed to continue my research for about 2 years. Since then, I've gotten so involved in the space shuttle program that there's really nothing that I'd rather be doing right now. And I have no plans to go back into research at this time. I guess that could change, but what I really want to do is stay with NASA, stay with the space shuttle program, and fly as many times as they'll let me fly.
When you are not on duty in the shuttle, what are you looking forward to do?
When I'm not on duty? Are you letting me off duty, Chris?
No, she's on duty. There's not much off time, unfortunately, as was pointed out a little bit earlier. We do have a very busy flight plan. There'll be a little time in the mornings and the evenings, perhaps, to look out the window, but not an awful lot.
Your name and affiliation?
Margaret Smilo, Nippon Television Network. Dr. Ride, do you have any plans to be the first mother who has traveled to space? And Dr. Thagard, are there any reasons to be concerned about the effects of travel in space on childbearing?
Go ahead, Norm.
Well, I'm not personally concerned. I think as long as you stay out of the radiation belts, there's probably not I think the same things apply to humans as apply to pregnant humans, so I don't think that there's any distinction to be drawn there.
And you'll notice that I'm not answering the first part of your question.
Right here, your name and affiliation, please. Yes.
Susan Pallets, ABC News. Sally, now that you have the opportunity to achieve your goals, what advice do you have for the young women of our nation to best achieve their goals?
I guess that if their goals are the same as mine, if they want to get into the astronaut program, really the only advice that I could give them is to pick some field that they're interested in, scientific field, which is what I did, and go as far as they can in that. I think that to try and second-guess NASA and decide what type of person NASA really wants or what background NASA really wants from anyone is not the right way to approach it. You just ought to decide what field you're really interested in and honestly want to go into, pursue that, and then if the opportunity comes up to apply for the astronaut program, it works.
Who do we have? Barbara Strouk?
Barbara Strouk from the Houston Chronicle. Sally, I have two questions for you. I'd like to hear some more about what you're going to be doing exactly on the launch. And also I'd like to know, yesterday your flight director, Tommy Holloway, said that your presence, though as a woman, had not changed the training or anything, how you had been the last year, but he said your presence on the flight will cause some inconveniences, he said, to the rest of the crew, and he said to ask you about that. And so here I am.
And in fairness to Tommy, I think he said might as opposed to will.
Might, yeah.
As far as the activities on launch and landing, I don't know whether you've seen pictures of the flight deck, but looking forward on the flight deck, Cripp sits in the left seat, Rick sits in the right seat, and I'm right between in the row behind them. So I can see all the computer displays, and I can see many of the meters that there are in the cockpit. And I have all of the checklists that Rick and Cripp have. And I guess that my job, if everything goes well, my job is just to read out a couple of the nominal steps that we do. And really that's all. It's just a monitoring job other than that. If anything goes wrong, then I reach for the appropriate checklist and start reading and monitor whatever systems I can help monitor.
I guess I'd like to, I respect Tommy, and I know he means well, but Sally has been anything but an inconvenience on this crew. She really has helped out.
Morton Dean?
Sally, along those same lines, has it taken a little bit of getting used to work with four men, and has it taken a little bit getting used to the idea of traveling in such tight quarters with four men? And do they tend to defer you? Do they continue their on-ground gentlemanly ways when they're with you in training for this flight? Or do you find that you become just one of the boys?
It really hasn't taken any getting used to. I was a graduate student in physics before, and I was used to working with men in that field and women also. I don't think that has really taken any getting used to at all. And I haven't felt like I've been deferred to in any way. In fact, Cripp won't even open doors for me anymore.
I learned that right away, Morton.
We'll take one more question here in Houston and then entertain questions from the headquarters in Washington. And you are, please?
John Harsh, Christian Science Monitor. Commander Crippen, what are the challenges associated with landing at Kennedy, and how will that affect the capabilities of the overall shuttle program?
The challenges from a personal standpoint are not really different from landing any place. You've got a desired area to touch down, and as long as the vehicle is behaving normally, meaning no navigation, guidance, or flight control system problems, it's the same challenge that all of the crews that previously landed the space shuttle have faced. The things that have made us hesitant about going into Kennedy Space Center are, number one, weather. There's preponderance of thunderstorms in that particular area, and it could be one of the things that could keep us from going there on our flight if they did develop those kinds of problems. The other that's also weather associated is crosswinds. We have not had an opportunity to test out the crosswind capability of the shuttle as well as we would like. Consequently, we have redlined it at 15 knots, which all of us feel fairly comfortable with. During quite a bit of the day, you can get crosswinds greater than that at Kennedy. However, landing it early in the morning, we don't anticipate that to be a problem. The other is that if we should develop some kind of a vehicle problem, it makes it a little bit tougher to be working on a confined runway, but that's not any different than flights 5 and 6 were met with when they landed at Edwards Air Force Base and the lake bed was not available to them.
We're going to go to the other centers and entertain questions now, and then if time permits, we'll come back to a few last questions here in Houston. First, the NASA headquarters in Washington.
This is NASA headquarters.
Jerry Hannafin, Time Magazine. Dr. Ride, couple of fast, quick questions here, sir, ma'am. What are you going to do after the end of this flight? Are you going to, do you sense you'll become a footnote in history, or will you go on the shelf? What are your forward plans after this flight? What's your duty tasks?
Well, my plans right after this flight are to get back into the astronaut office as soon as they'll let me and get back in line for another flight. I think that's what I've said all along I really want to do, and that's what I'm planning to do.
Good luck. Second, Tom Holloway, again, quoting him, spoke admiringly of your competence as a member of the crew. Now, Dr. Ride, during your training exercises as a member of this group, when there was a problem, when there was a glitch or whatever, how did you respond? How do you take it as a human being? Do you weep? What do you do?
Why doesn't anybody ask Rick those questions?
The commander weeps.
I don't think that I react any differently than anybody else on the crew does.
Sue Butler for Time and Space World. Sally, your school friend Susan Oakey has said in one of her articles that you are very, very competitive and that you gave up tennis when you got too busy to do it justice to practice rather than take a chance on coming in second. I'm sorry to ask this question, but if you had not been selected to be the very first American woman to fly, would you have quit the space program rather than fly in second or third?
No. The reason that I quit playing tennis was because I wasn't a good tennis player. I wouldn't have, no. I didn't come into this program to be the first woman in space. I came in to get a chance to fly as soon as I could, and I'm planning to stay in it as long as they'll let me.
Mike Meacham with Gannett News Service. Can either Fabian or Ride describe physically how they move the arm and try to relate it to something on Earth so we can get an idea of how you pick up the spas?
What you do?
I've got one to you.
The RMS, which has flown successfully on the orbiter before, and we think will again many times, is an electromechanical device with a computer interface between the orbiter and the arm, and that computer interface basically makes the arm do what you want it to do. We have a couple of controllers of the same type which are used to fly the orbiter, and we let the computer know what we want the arm to do, and the computer makes sure that the arm does what it is that it's requested to do. And it's just about that straightforward.
So you don't get a sense of feel from the arm as you're operating it, or when it actually grabs hold of the spas? Is there no physical sense of feel or anything like that?
That's correct. There's no such feel.
Rob Navius, UPI Radio. A two-part question. First for Sally. Do you have any sense of your role as a role model that other American women will look to during and after this flight? And for the other three rookies on this mission, you're all from the class of 78, your feelings about getting a chance to fly as soon as you will, 5 years, a relatively short wait, on the eve of the mission?
Well, I guess I'll start that off. I've come to realize that I will be a role model. That's something that I didn't come to NASA intending to be. That's not why I joined the program. You know, I joined the program to get a chance to fly. And I guess that as far as being a role model is concerned, what I intend to do is just do what I've been trained to do as good a job as I can while I'm up there, and hope that that provides a good role model.
Norm, why don't you start?
To fly as soon as you can, and now if I can next beat my 40th birthday, I'll be even happier.
As Sally said, flying early is great. Flying late is great. People join this business to fly, and all of us who are in the business are either in the process of getting ready to fly or anxiously anticipating getting ready to fly. And that's the name of the game.
There's one more answer to that, and echo the feelings of it's tremendous to have the opportunity to fly in the program, and whenever is as good as any other time, I think.
Sooner the better, though.
The sooner the better.
Rosenthal, the Associated Press. This is for Dr. Thagard, please, and then one for Dr. Ride. Dr. Thagard, how do you plan to conduct your examinations? Are you going to have office hours of sort during certain periods of time? The astronauts, the others come to you?
Okay, the doctor is in, Crippen says. First of all, I have no real plans to examine anyone unless, if you're talking about a detailed physical examination, we certainly plan, if anyone doesn't feel well, to look at them to the extent that they're willing to put up with that sort of thing. I'm the subject for most of the things that go on, and I plan to do that interspersed throughout the mission, but heavy early on and late. Seems everybody wants things done immediately after getting on orbit and just before coming home.
And now for Dr. Ride, please. 2 other women have preceded you into space. Have you talked with the Russian cosmonauts at all?
No, I haven't.
Teresa Foley with Aerospace Daily. This is a 3-part question for Bob Crippen. Since you're the astronaut that's been assigned for the most shuttle flights so far, can you comment on, one, how routine shuttle flights are becoming, how much you think training time for astronauts can be pared down, and how often an astronaut can expect to fly once NASA gets up into the higher flight rates like 24 times per year?
Okay. I think for those of us that have an opportunity to fly, it will be a long time before you call it routine. That's anybody that takes off with 7 million pounds of thrust under them and calls it routine, they're a calmer person than I am. But from the standpoint of being able to turn crews around, go fly again in a fairly expeditious manner, I think that that is already happening by my flight, Dick Truly's flight, John going back and flying again, and so forth. So I believe we are becoming routine in that manner. However, we still have a lot to learn about making the shuttle operational and reducing the turnaround time. Most of that burden, I believe, falls upon our systems people here at the Johnson Space Center and the people at the Kennedy Space Center in being able to expeditiously verify that the vehicle is ready to go again and make such modifications as required to allow us to do that. Training, we're also learning as we go about that. It's obvious in my role that that I did not have to undergo most of the stuff that I'd seen the first time around, because quite a bit of that was redundant. However, it is also important that I work with my crew and we work together. So I've got to be involved with that at some particular point in time. That has been on my mind with regard to my next flight, Flight 13, in that crew is already in training. However, they're going through some preliminary stuff that I feel comfortable that they can do without me. That we can pare that down. We're working to do that, but I'm afraid I'm incapable of giving you a specific number right now, and it's one of the things that we're going to have to learn as we continue to fly the space shuttle. With regard to how often you can go do it, I'm not sure. My next flight should be less than a year away. I feel very comfortable with that. I think I'd even feel comfortable getting down to twice a year. I believe, is an ultimate goal. About 3 times a year would be a heavy load, and it would be dependent upon the nature of the flight and how repetitious it was of what you had previously flown.
Rob Navius, UPI Radio again. For the good doctor, a 2-part question. Number 1, what is once and for all the correct pronunciation of your last name? And secondly, did your late addition to the crew have any impact on your training for this mission?
The correct pronunciation is Thagard. It's a good old Danish name. And I was already the support crew when I was added, so I don't think that it was much of a problem. I was participating in the training anyway, whenever I could.
Yeah, I guess I would like to add a comment to that. That was one of the reasons, as I said earlier, that Norm was my pick to go fly with us, because he was a medical doctor. He was familiar with all aspects of our flight, and I felt that he was perfectly capable of stepping into any position and helping anybody out during the flight. So plus he did have to pick up the additional role of training to be EV1, of which I handed over to him. That means a person to go out in case of a contingency EVA, and that probably has been the biggest burden, of which he's found to be lots of fun, and he spent lots of time over in our water tank.
Yeah, Howard Benedict of AP. I'd like to ask Bob Crippen. There were reports that because of the delay in the STS-6 flight, you people were squeezed out a lot of your simulator time. Have you been able to catch up on all of that? And with the flights accelerating, how is the simulator going to work out with so many crews preparing?
I don't think our training people will have accused us of being cut out of any training time. We managed to do quite well, I believe. We have our training for the integrated part of our flight, where we train integrated with the Mission Control Center, was delayed. However, that period of time was shortened down to, I believe, something close to 8 weeks, and has been adequate as far as I was concerned. I don't believe that Tommy Holloway said any different to have us prepared to go fly and work together as a team with Mission Control Center. Yes, having only basically the 2 shuttle mission simulators is a factor. We're having to try to work around by using some part task trainers that we have to learn systems before going investing in time in the total big shuttle mission simulator. And we have lots of people working the training problem. It is something that we realize that needs some concentration. And what it really ends up meaning is that a lot of people are going to be doing their simulations from midnight till 4 in the morning and getting Saturdays and Sundays, I'm afraid.
One more. Howard Benedict of AP again. You have a very interesting patch. Did the crew design it? Was it a committee effort? And could somebody explain the symbolism in it?
It was a crew designed, and it was a committee effort. And I think I'll let Rick do the explanation of that.
Well, early on, I think we all contributed several ideas into putting the patch together, and the fact that we're flying the arm and that you can bend the joints in the arm so that it forms a 7 was something that we wanted to use. The fact that Sally is on the flight is certainly significant, and using at least an adaptation of the ancient symbols for the male and the female in the center of a sun symbol was something that we all thought looked good. Later on in the evolutionary period, Mr. Paul Collins of Grand Rapids, Michigan, who was commissioned to do some paintings, one of them of Sally, offered to help us with the final design of the patch, and he contributed some of his thoughts, which enhanced it, and some of the folks here at NASA that work with us on our patches also contributed. So it was certainly a group effort, and I think we've all been very pleased with the way it turned out.
Thank you. Headquarters now at Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
Dick Lewis, Salamander Books. This question is addressed to Dr. Thagard. In reference to space adaptation syndrome, we heard very little about it prior to Skylab. It seemed to be rather rare or non-existent on the Mercury orbital flights, hardly at all. On Gemini, only one instance I can recall on Apollo, that was on Apollo 8. Now in these larger vehicles, like Skylab and the shuttle, it seems to be fairly common. Is there a relationship, do you suppose, between the ability of the crew to move around in these larger vehicles and the onset of the syndrome?
Well, there may be. Certainly anecdotally, you could almost believe that. But the people in the early capsules were not necessarily immune. I think the first instance of space adaptation syndrome occurred with the Russians, and that was Titov, and I think that was way back in 1963. And even in his cramped capsule, he wound up actually throwing up at some point. Some people have commented that when they felt bad in some of the flights, if they just would sit down and be still for a little while, and apparently in Apollo you had the luxury on the way to the moon to being still if you needed to, that helped, and a lot of people just had passing little twinges that never came to anything. So it may be that being able to move around worsens the problem. I guess we don't know what causes it, so it's hard to say, yes, absolutely, that makes it worse, but there's some indications that maybe it does.
Steve Scott, AM 92. You indicated, Dr. Thagard, that you'd sort of be the guinea pig, as it were, on the SAS test. Will there be any additional tests that you would be maybe performing on yourself if you yourself get space sick?
Well, I already do a full battery of tests on myself. The only difference would be that I would then be doing that same battery of tests while I didn't feel so well. So I don't think it's going to change what I would do.
Frank Yasenda from Today. I have three quick questions. The first one is for Dr. Thagard. Do you intend to act as a personal medical advisor to the crew members, or is that going to be relegated to the ground in case they do get sick? Will you be making those decisions yourself?
Well, I think I'd be usurping the console doctor's prerogatives if I did that. In fact, I'm sent up with a list of things to do, and I pretty much intend to do those. If someone wants a curbside consultation, I guess I could do that. But by and large, that's still the responsibility of the MOCR, the mission control doctor.
Okay, the second question is for Dr. Ride. Have you found in any portion of your training, either early on or now, any differences in the way you were trained and the things that the trainers were looking for than, say, a male astronaut has been?
No, I really haven't. I don't think that there's been anything in any of the training that we've done that I've found that.
Okay, and the third question, if I may play a devil's advocate for a moment. There's been a lot of attention placed on you, Dr. Ride. How do the male crew members feel? Do they feel neglected at all in terms of the public attention that they're getting?
Why are you asking me?
Actually, I think maybe we've been relieved in that Sally's taken away some of the focus on us. From a commander's standpoint, I was a little bit concerned because I didn't know of all of the attention Sally was going to be getting. That I was afraid it was going to detract from some of her training. Consequently, I've probably been guilty of having Sally avoid quite a bit of the contact with the media, but I think we've done that in a reasonable balance. And from my standpoint, Sally's been able to handle all that very well and blend it in with the training such that it didn't interrupt anything. Rick, you got a comment?
I don't think any of us joined the program seeking media attention, so I don't think I have to speak for myself that I'm at all concerned of anything being drawn away from me. If anything, sitting next to Sally, I'm sure my picture will appear in more places than I need it to appear. But I think it's great for the women of the world and the United States to be able to focus some attention on Sally, and she's holding up under that very well, and I think it's all very productive.
Joan Hellerson, today I have two questions for Captain Crippen. As you approach your second mission, how are your emotions and expectations differing from those you experienced before the first? The second question is, will we see a difference in your heart rate?
I think my expectations and emotions are probably very similar to what they were prior to the first flight. Only this time I know how much fun it is, and previously I just thought I knew how much fun it was. So maybe I'm looking forward to it even more. Now that we've flown the vehicle, the schedule is probably a little bit more reliable than the first time we were getting ready to go fly, so I feel that I can pretty much count on the way we've got the plan laid out. And no, you won't be seeing any change in my heart rate because for this flight, it's not being monitored.
Anything more from Kennedy? Okay, let's go to Marshall Space Flight Center, Huntsville, Alabama.
To Commander Crippen, it was on the last flight we realized that, or heard that Story Musgrave had stood up all the way down on re-entry, more or less watching like a rider in a bus. Are you going to allow this type of conduct on this flight? Any chance that Dr. Thagard might be looking over your shoulder the same way?
There comes some point in the entry which is probably at least by entry interface and preferably for the deorbit burn where I think that the cabin needs to be in a fairly orderly manner. That means everybody needs to be in their place and time. So I think we'll probably all be strapped in for entry.
Okay, and my last question then is to Dr. Thagard. Being a medical doctor going up for the first time, are there any additional medications or equipment for treatment that will be going on board this time, or will be the standard gear on previous flights?
No, I'm doing primarily investigative things on this flight. There's really no new medications that we might take on board, and I personally don't intend to take any special medications.
Dave Dooling, the Huntsville Times.
I have several questions. For starters, Dr. Thagard, will Dr. Thornton be doing the same experiment routines on STS-8?
He will be doing probably the same experiments plus more. As a matter of fact, I think that the Tidris, which was 20,000 pounds, may not fly, and I think that means 15,000 pounds of Dr. Thornton's medical gear.
If Bill gets his way.
Okay, for Crippen or Hauck, which of the two approaches to the SPAS, the V-bar, the inertial, do you regard as the more demanding? And if you regard either as more demanding, would you elaborate a little bit?
I think the first approach that's done is the more demanding, which Crippen will do because it'll be done for the first time. I don't think there's anything special about the inertial approach, which I will be doing in the afternoon. The orbiter performs a rotational maneuver, and I just move the orbiter so that I keep the SPAs centered in the overhead window. So I don't think one is any more difficult than the other than the fact that one's done first.
Yeah, I guess from a strictly orbital flying, the V-bar approach in a classic sense is the easiest way to fly in because you're in a stabilized orbit with the vehicle that you're approaching. An inertial approach could be a little bit tougher, especially if it was prolonged. From the standpoint of flying in from 200 feet, visually and control-wise, we perceive very little difference.
For Crippen, how are you keeping up the what appears to be a breakneck pace with being recycled for flight so often? And is there any overlap between training for the Solar Max rescue and training for 7?
Well, I don't think it's a breakneck pace. As far as I'm concerned, the training level and it isn't all training that we end up involved in. There are many other functions, meetings, decisions, mission rules, and that kind of thing that you have to work with as well. And I find the pace for STS-7 much more relaxed than I found for STS-1. Most of the activities that are going on with regard to 13 right now, I think that maybe the secret is you end up with a crew as confident as I have on 7 and as the ones I've got on 13, and you tell them what you want to happen, and they make it happen, and you just check on it every now and then.
Okay, for Dr. Ride or Fabian, how responsive have you found the control of the STS-1 in your training and simulation so far?
Well, of course, the training simulations that we've got are just that. They're simulations. The SPAS is very responsive, and in the simulator, the attitude control system works very well, and we don't have any problem at all controlling it. I think, like I said, I'm just speaking from the simulator, but we're not expecting any problems at all with the SPAS. We think that we can command it to hold attitude, and if we want to change its attitude, we can do that fairly easily.
Okay, and finally for Dr. Ride, have you felt that the extensive press coverage of the first American woman in space has been disproportionate or heavy-handed, or at times has it even threatened to get in the way of doing your job?
Press coverage? I think that NASA has really done me a great favor by allowing me to continue training to the extent that I needed to train during the last year, and they filtered all the interview requests that came in and really made sure that I wasn't spending time that I should have been spending training doing interviews. And as a result of that, I really haven't felt much pressure, and I haven't felt that it's cut into my training time at all. And I'm really grateful that NASA took that approach in leading up to this flight, because I think that it would have been doing me a disservice and probably doing NASA a disservice to take away from the training time to do interviews before the flight.
Okay, you nicely sidestepped my first part of the question. Do you feel that the coverage that has been given has been disproportionate with regards to first American woman in space?
I think that it's maybe too bad that our society isn't further along and that this is such a big deal. But I guess if the American public thinks that it's a big deal, then it's probably good that it's getting the coverage that it's getting. I think it's time that we get away from that, and it's time that people realize that women in this country can do any job that they want to do.
Tom Knight, Channel 48.
Rick Hauck, after your years of flight experience and the training that you've been going through, how much different have you found the shuttle and the simulations to maneuver than other aircraft you've flown?
Well, of course, we only fly the shuttle aerodynamically during the very last portions of the flight, and our best simulator for that is the shuttle training aircraft, our modified Crippen Gulfstream that we practice our landings from an altitude of 30,000 feet on down. And I've been told that that's a very good simulator for the orbiter, and it handles an extremely honest way, and it seems very stable. And I'm just impressed that the shuttle went from the drawing boards to the flying qualities that it apparently has with very little modifications. So it's really a great pleasure to take that into the landing pattern and bring it down to a landing.
Also, could you describe your approach to KSC a little bit? Your approach to landing.
Depending upon which runway we go to, and that, of course, depends upon the winds, essentially we'll be coming in overhead the field at around 40,000 feet and making what you might call a teardrop, or if you want to do it in numbers of degrees of a circle, about a 270-degree turn, either to the south or the north runway, and descending at about 11,000 feet per minute. During that turn, the approach is essentially no different from the approaches of previous flights, and the fact that we're going into the Cape really doesn't modify that.
And finally, for Dr. Ride, your position,
during reentry and landing, riding somewhat as a flight engineer. If any problems develop with the systems, you'll be monitoring them. Will you be the one who will attempt to make any corrections, or will that be Cripp or Hauck?
No, Cripp and Rick are the two that have access to all the controls. All I do really is help them monitor and help them by reading the checklist, finding the right procedures, and that sort of thing.
And correcting our mistakes.
And she does a super job.
Don Bird.
Dr. Thagard, are you working on anything during this flight towards developing a method for predicting compatibility with weightlessness?
Do you mean predicting those who will get space adaptation syndrome?
Right.
No. We're just going to do some basic research to try and find out what the interrelation, as I said before, the interrelationship between the sensory systems are, and to see if increased intracranial pressure is a contributing factor. We're not really looking for predictive measures or techniques.
Okay, and Bob Crippen, how do you feel about working with such a large crew in terms of the amount of space available in the vehicle?
Well, as far as I can determine thus far through the simulations that we've had, it's nice to have a large crew. We've got enough people that we can divide up the work such that the workloads are not too hectic, and the space volume itself is designed to accommodate actually up to 6 or 7 crew members, so I don't believe that 5 is going to be a problem. I think it's probably wise that we progressively start up from 4 to 5 to on flight 9 that we'll be doing 6 people. So as far as I'm concerned, it's nice to have that many people. Maybe I'll get to spend some time looking out the window taking pictures.
Dave Dooling.
For Crippen, on STS-5 and 6, the mission specialists were designated as EV1 and 2, yet even before Dr. Thagard was assigned to the crew, you and Fabian were designated as EV1 and 2. Why wasn't that task given to Dr. Ride and Fabian?
Okay. There were 2 factors involved with that. One was that we didn't have a suit built at the time that would handle Sally. And fact number 2 was I was already trained for EVA, and Sally was going to be very busy with the activities that she had to learn her position in the center seat going up and down for ascent and entry, as well as the on-orbit activities. So I personally thought that was a better division of labor, and I made the assignment.
Jerry Hayes, Channel 19.
Mr. Crippen, do you think that this mission is going to be any easier on you than STS-1 was?
I'm not sure of what easier means. As I said, I thought that the activities leading up to STS-1 were more hectic than what I'm experiencing right now. That particular mission was one that was vehicle test-oriented only. We have a large number of payloads and experiments that are going to be conducted. But I think in both cases, they're lots of fun. I enjoyed myself on STS-1. I plan on enjoying myself on STS-7.
You made several references to sitting back and taking more pictures this time around. That's where I was really coming from. Okay. You still are going to be very, very busy, though, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I guess on flight 1, I found myself very busy. Did